Hi there. Today we are going to talk about the internal capsule. This internal capsule is not only important from an MBBS point of view but also for dental examinations. So let us see what the internal capsule is all about. So the internal capsule is a compact bundle of projection fibers. Now we have the white matter of the brain and we divide the white matter of the brain into association, commissural and projection fibers. So this internal capsule, it belongs to projection fibers. It is a compact bundle of projection fibers. By projection fibers we mean the white fibers which connect the cortical areas to the subcortical areas and vice versa. So this internal capsule is going to connect the cortex to the subcortical area and then the subcortical area to the cortex of the brain. We will see how. So for the time being, it's a compact bundle. So this is also important that the internal capsule is a compact bundle. So the fibers are condensed here in the internal capsule. So that is what we mean when we say it's a compact bundle, and we should remember it's a compact bundle of projection fibers. If you look at the boundaries of the internal capsule, medially we have the caudate nucleus and thalamus, while laterally we have the lentiform nucleus. So I'll again show you these boundaries. Now when I say the internal capsule is a compact bundle, this means that it has a high concentration of motor and sensory fibers. So this point is very important, high concentration of motor and sensory fibers. Why? Because this implies that a small lesion here can have a widespread effect. So this you must keep in mind, that why internal capsule is clinically important, because it's a compact bundle of projection fibers, and since it's a compact bundle, a small lesion here can have a widespread effect. So what happens in internal capsule? Well, there may be paralysis, hemiplegia, or there may be sensory loss in the opposite half of the body. So this is showing you the motor and sensory fibers passing through the internal capsule. And the idea of showing this diagram is to show that it is a compact bundle of projection fibers. And you see here lot many motor fibers are passing through this yellow portion, which is the internal capsule. And here you have sensory fibers passing through the internal capsule. So look at the location of the internal capsule here. We have got the caudate nucleus shown in green, the thalamus shown in brown, and then we have the lentiform nucleus which is located laterally. So you can appreciate here the V-shaped arrangement of the internal capsule with the lentiform nucleus located laterally in the concavity, and you have the head of caudate nucleus and the thalamus located medially. So internal capsule is a compact bundle of projection fibers, and fibers are condensed here, and it is bounded medially by the head of caudate nucleus and thalamus respectively, while laterally lies the lentiform nucleus. So parts of internal capsule. So internal capsule is a V-shaped structure. In the horizontal section of the brain, we appreciate it as a V-shaped structure which is bounded medially by the head of caudate nucleus and the thalamus, while laterally it is bounded by the lentiform nucleus. This bend is called the genu, and this internal capsule has got an anterior limb, it has got a posterior limb, and then it has got a part which lies behind the lentiform nucleus, which is referred to as a retrolentiform part, the retrolentiform part of internal capsule. And students, internal capsule also has got a sublentiform part which lies below the lentiform nucleus. So you cannot see it in this image here. So it has got 5 parts. The internal capsule has got the anterior limb, the genu or the bend, the posterior limb, the retrolentiform part lying posterior to the lentiform nucleus, and the sublentiform part which lies inferior or sub means inferior to the lentiform nucleus. So what are the constituent fibers of the internal capsule? Well, we divide them as motor fibers and sensory fibers. So let us see the motor fibers in the internal capsule. So they are the corticopontine fibers. So corticopontine fibers means they are passing from the cortex and going to the pons. The pons is the subcortical area here, while cortex is the cortical area. So different parts of the cortex, we have frontopontine fibers, these pass through the anterior limb. They also pass through the genu. They also pass through the posterior limb. Then we have parieto-pontine and occipito-pontine fibers. They pass through the retrolentiform part of the internal capsule. And then we have the parieto-pontine and the temporo-pontine fibers which pass through the sublentiform part of the internal capsule. Well, students, other motor fibers passing through the internal capsule other than corticopontine are the pyramidal fibers, and we can appreciate here that the corticonuclear fibers for the head and neck are passing through the genu of the internal capsule. And then the corticospinal fibers, they are arranged in discrete bundles and they are passing here, one can appreciate, through the posterior limb. The corticospinal fibers for the upper limb, trunk and lower limb are arranged in bundles from anterior to posterior aspect. So this diagram here shows the constituent motor fibers of the internal capsule. Now, the sensory fibers are mainly the thalamocortical fibers. So they are passing from the thalamus and going to different areas of the cortex. So we divide them into 4 distinct groups. As you can see here in this diagram, the fibers passing from the thalamus to the parietal lobe and the frontal lobe, they are referred to as the superior thalamic radiation. So this is superior thalamic radiation. The fibers passing from the thalamus, shown in orange here, to the frontal lobe, they constitute the anterior thalamic radiation. The fibers passing from the thalamus to the occipital lobe constitutes the posterior thalamic radiation, while the fibers passing from the thalamus to the temporal lobe, it constitutes the inferior thalamic radiation. So sensory fibers once again. Now here the thalamic radiations are shown. The sensory fibers can be divided into the 4 types: anterior, superior, posterior and inferior thalamic radiation, as I have explained in the previous slide. So this is the tabulated form of the constituent fibers of the internal capsule. Now here we can appreciate the different parts of the internal capsule and which motor fibers and sensory fibers are passing through different parts of the internal capsule. So this posterior thalamic radiation is also called optic radiation, while the inferior thalamic radiation is also called auditory radiation. So here we can appreciate that through the sublentiform part, this you could not see in the diagram also, pass through the sublentiform part, pass the motor fibers parieto-pontine and the temporo-pontine fibers. So this table I have already explained previously with the diagrams. So I move forward. Now this particular diagram is showing you the posterior and inferior thalamic radiation. They are highlighted here. Now students, you have to remember the word IMA, Indian Medical Association. So inferior colliculus fibers, they go to medial geniculate body, and from medial geniculate body they pass as auditory radiation to the primary auditory area. So inferior colliculus I, medial geniculate body M and auditory radiation A. So it goes to the auditory area. So this pathway. Now opposite to it, or you can say related to it, is instead of inferior colliculus, if we use the word superior colliculus, instead of medial geniculate body, if we use the word lateral geniculate body, then instead of auditory radiation we will use the visual radiation, and visual radiation goes to the visual cortex. So in this way we can remember parts of the auditory and the visual pathway also, that which geniculate body is concerned with which pathway. So lateral geniculate body is concerned with the visual pathway, while medial geniculate body is concerned with the auditory pathway. This is the horizontal section of the brain, anterior limb, genu, posterior limb of internal capsule. Now this dotted portion is showing you the sublentiform part, yes, sublentiform fibers, and this blue portion is showing you the retrolentiform part, the auditory radiation, how it is emerging from the lateral geniculate body and ultimately going to the visual cortex. So formation of concept is very important when we are talking about the auditory and the visual radiations. Now arterial supply of the internal capsule. So arterial supply, well, the upper parts of the anterior limb, genu and posterior limb shown in green here, they are all supplied by the striate branches of middle cerebral artery. Now this arteries of the brain, anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery and posterior cerebral artery, they give cortical branches and perforating branches. Cortical branches, they supply the cortex, while perforating branches, they go deep inside the substance of the brain, and the arteries which are arising from middle cerebral artery, they are called the anterolateral group. So they are the perforating arteries arising from middle cerebral artery. They are referred to as the anterolateral group, and these arteries divide into medial and lateral striate branches. So the striate branches of the middle cerebral artery, so these are the perforating branches arising from the middle cerebral artery. They supply the upper parts of anterior limb, genu and posterior limb of internal capsule, and they are shown in green here. The lower part of the anterior limb is supplied by recurrent branch of anterior cerebral artery, while the lower part of the genu is supplied by direct branches shown in brown here from the internal carotid and posterior communicating arteries. The retrolentiform part, sublentiform part of internal capsule and the lower part of the posterior limb, they are supplied by the anterior choroidal artery. This is also a branch of the internal carotid artery. So blood supply of the internal capsule is important because these arteries are supplying the compact bundle fibers passing through, so many fibers passing through a limited area. So a damage to the blood supply does have an effect. It can cause paralysis of the body. So one artery is very important, that is referred to as the Charcot's artery. Why this is important? Because this is the artery of cerebral hemorrhage. So what is this? I told you middle cerebral artery gives a lot of anterolateral branches which are the perforating branches of the arteries. So they are called the striate branches of the middle cerebral artery. Now these striate branches, they divide into medial and lateral groups. So one of the lateral striate branches of middle cerebral artery is larger than others, and this is called Charcot's artery. This, students, is the Charcot's artery of cerebral hemorrhage. Why is it prone to hemorrhage? Well, the answer is because it is large in size and it is thin walled. So these two factors make it more prone to hemorrhage. And when hemorrhage is there, when there is rupture of this artery, it can cause hemiplegia of the opposite half of the body, as the important corticonuclear and corticospinal fibers in the internal capsule are damaged. So always remember, Charcot's artery of cerebral hemorrhage is the examiner's favorite question. What is Charcot's artery? It is the lateral striate branch of middle cerebral artery which is prone to rupture. That is why it is referred to as the artery of cerebral hemorrhage. Another artery that is important is the artery of Heubner. Now this is the recurrent branch of anterior cerebral artery. So internal carotid artery gives off anterior cerebral artery, and anterior cerebral artery gives a branch which goes backwards, that is called the recurrent branch of anterior cerebral artery. So this enters the anterior perforated substance, and thrombosis of this artery results in opposite side paralysis of face and upper extremity. So this also you should keep in mind. So now we come towards the end of the lecture, a short lecture but a very important lecture on the internal capsule. Well, the carry home point is mentioned here, that sometimes a small problem has a big effect, So this person is thinking, yes, like internal capsule lesion can cause hemiplegia. Why? Because the internal capsule is a compact bundle of projection fibers. So lot many sensory and motor fibers passing through this strategically important area located between the caudate nucleus and thalamus on the medial side and the lentiform nucleus on the lateral side. So I hope you found today's lecture interesting and you could understand it, and do read internal capsule because questions are frequently asked from this portion in the examinations. Till the next time we meet, it's bye from me. Take care.